Yeah. Well, this is UnSpun episode 95. We're going live a few minutes early because we were just starting to talk about some great stuff. Thanks everybody who supported the show last week. Thanks for all of you supporting the show this week. We're back with Bill and Clint to continue our discussion and to what was it? The being the the hero, the legacy of our children. Now I've forgotten the title.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, I don't even know what we're talking about today.
The
I just
Heroes
walked in.
to Our Descendants, A Legacy of Natural Law, Part 2. There we go.
Yeah,
So
there
we're
we are.
just kind of continuing where we started off, what was it, 3 weeks ago, I guess. And we were having a great conversation. Clint can't stay too late tonight. He's going to go at 6 Pacific. So we got about an hour and 2 minutes to have fun here. So welcome,
I,
everyone.
yeah, I don't even think we really got into that topic the last time around.
Well, hopefully we do a bit tonight. You want to start off, Bill?
Um, sure, I don't even know where to begin. The context that I'm operating from is that there are tons of indicators that we're in decline, our society's in decline. So that's everything from funny money to decreased birth rates to social decay, uh, to shifting like all of these things have happened in the past. So, you know, I might have issues with postmodernism and its results in our current society, but those same results have been found in other societies from other ideologies or other events. They're all indicators of a fall of civilization. So my thinking is we need to be able to survive that fall, and we need to preserve certain things through that fall. And the notion of preserving something you have, I don't think really inspires a lot of people. You've already got it. What's there to buy, right? So my take on it is that, especially as fathers and as men, we've been taken so far away from what that means that by taking up this cause, it gives us the opportunity to become the men that we're meant to be, which is the protectors of our community, to be the ones that are forging the future, and so on. And we're so bought into the notion of outsourcing that to the government or the university and so on that I think we need to pick that up again. And in doing that, we have an opportunity to be remembered and be remembered by our descendants, right? So we can we can have we can have what most people are looking for. They're looking for immortality. They're looking for purpose. They're looking for responsibility. We have it all in front of us. We have a problem that we have to deal with. So let's become the heroes to our descendants. And I think that entails a lot of thought into how we're going to do that. That means thinking out 10, 12 generations. It's not, what am I going to create within my lifetime and leave as an inheritance to my kids, sort of thing. So I don't know. There's the kickoff.
Yeah, I agree with you on all of that. And it's, this whole idea of the sheepdog, which is kind of synonymous with being an alpha, etc., is really what we need more of. It's actually it the more I've thought about it with friends, the more it's on different levels as well. It operates on several different levels in society. And, you know, you mentioned the fall. It's like there's the community fall, there's your personal fall. It's coming out of each of these, realizing where we're at and the situation that we're in. And, looking at things seriously and looking for real solutions and not just assumptions. What do we think we know? What did we hear from someone else in the past? But actually looking at the facts and looking at the situation and saying, where are we? What do we need to do? Here's the plan. And we need to act quickly.
Yeah, and I think that the main key to be able to put anything like that together is understanding what's of value to preserve and what isn't, and then understand how all that fits together. I've been looking at biohistory, which is really about epigenetic conditions that lead to shifts in civilization. And when you break it down, you've got sort of traits or temperaments that lead towards civilization, and then traits and temperament that lead towards vigor and so on. There's a balance across all of those things. So if you don't understand how all of those things interact, whether it's a civilizational temperament taken too far can no longer defend itself and begins to erode, or a vigor taken too far without a discipline to go with it, it ends up just being tyranny and war. So if we understand the mechanisms in society, then understand how that plays out on individual values, we can start constructing like a really adaptive sort of knowledge base to know how we need to respond to changing times. Now, these changing times are much longer than our lifetime. So if we can start putting this together, start putting together a lineage of knowledge within our families to say, when times are good, these are some of the things that we have to watch out for. People get too comfortable. They lose their gumption to defend things.
Yeah,
End up giving it away.
It kind of goes in a like a sine wave or something, is what Mark was explaining the other day. This, you have everything gets liberal and out of control, and then the society gets stressed, and people wake up and say, "What the heck?" And then this is when you have your best,
And there's these sweet spots where civilization's high and vigor's high but declining, you get the most creative sections of society, right? Or when civilizational traits are high and vigor is high as well, then that's where you get these great people with great ideas, right? And it's when they cross over is the sweet spot. So how do we understand that sweet spot, and then how can we start creating social norms around that?
Right.
Things like high competitive physical sports increases vigor and temperament, but it also increases discipline, which is what you want. That's what honor is, vigor with discipline. So that's what we've been discussing over the last week or so in the sheepdog group, is this notion of biodiversity or biohistory and cycles of civilization. And it gets really detailed, right down into endocrine systems and so on. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say what it sounds like you're talking about is something that Plato talked about in his 5 regimes. I when I read about the aristocracy, the timocracy, the oligarchy, the what we're in now, democracy, and then of course tyranny at the end. This cyclical thing that he was writing about in Republic, the 5 regimes, and that we are in the end of that 4th regime, which is democracy, which is about the worst place you can be, according to many people, including the founding fathers, who wrote explicitly that democracy is absolutely not to have anything to do with this country and the way it runs. That democracy is the worst possible place you can be. And we're headed towards that aspect right now of falling out of democracy, where people figure out, hey, I can vote myself anything I want to out of the public coffers. And I can, even without being in office, I just need a special interest type of group. And so see, I always offer the most unpopular views, unfortunately, which makes me unpopular. I always try to make sure that people understand that it's always your fault. It's always, you can't blame groups, you can't blame this, you can't blame that. You always got to blame yourself for everything, first of all. Second of all, you have to realize that you've been defeated utterly. It's not that you've been just merely demasculated. It's not just merely that they've turned us dumb. We've been defeated. And in my opinion, before you can go forward with anything like this that we're talking about, you first have to admit defeat. you have to admit that in every way possible, our society and each of us individually have been defeated utterly. Yep. And until you do that, until you get to that point where you're at the very bottom, there's no way you can start climbing up.
You are a slave. You know, and here's a thing that I came to in the last few days. The fall is synonymous with being a slave. All of the iniquity, all of the transgressions, everything that everybody gets into, all of this stuff are all signs of this fall, and then are signs of us being conquered as well, and how we got into this position by not, by our fathers and ourselves not paying attention. And then we can begin to see, a path back out to unenslave ourselves.
Well, the whole purpose of the reason why I wrote this giant tome and am continuing to write is because I did figure out how it is that they defeated us, not just through ignorance, of course, because people were always fairly ignorant. There's always a high literacy rate, which, I'd almost prefer people be illiterate than know the English language at this point, because we're so utterly fooled by the English language compared to what their sort of double speak, their legal language, the Latin grammatical set to the English language, which they call dog Latin, the language for the beasts, basically, right? The four-footed animal. When they call someone four-footed, they're referring to you as an animal, a beast, someone that will do labor. And so they call us four-footed beasts with that in mind, speaking dog Latin, which is, again, basically the Latin grammatical set to English. And English is a language, it's a horrid language. It's Mark Twain called it a mongrel language that borrowed from so many spaces. And in fact, if you taught English in the school and you explained that almost every word comes from a different language, you'd actually be able to teach kids a lot, because, all these words had different meanings before they came around to English. Now we're speaking sort of this almost adversarial language. So,
but how do you square that with the notion that language, meaning in language is pertains to how people use it? Because language is always changing. Like colloquial language is always changing. I understand
the hardest part for people to get, and it's a term I recommend everybody just stop and go, look it up and understand it well. It's called terms of art. Okay.
Right, but that pertains to a certain industry. I'm talking about just because what I'm hearing is a conflation of normal people's regular use of English with terms of art in terms of law, and then conflating the two and then saying people are stupid speaking dog Latin.
No. It's not. It's that you're going to court speaking English while they're speaking legal.
Oh, so you mean in the context of court?
So you're going into an art.
In the context of everything that they present to us, the language that they're using, and all the documents.
But I'm getting at is the context is important. If you're
let me give you some examples, so that it's clear that what is meant by terms of art. I'm a botanist. No, see, I'm a surgeon, and you're my nurse. Okay, I'm going to start speaking to you in a bunch of terms of the art of medicine. And I'm going to say, I want this instrument, I want this stat, I want this, with all these terms. Now, imagine if you hadn't been trained in those terms to communicate in those terms. What would you do? I'd ask for scissors and you'd give me a hammer, right? So now take that and take that art to botany, take it to mathematics, take it to legalism, take it to government. What you have with government is an art form where they have created their own terms. Now, those terms sound exactly like they sound in regular common speak, in regular English, right? Mm-hmm. Right? We say. What was our example, Jan? We said prestigious, right?
Well, yeah, that was right. One
perfect example. The word danger actually means jurisdiction of a state. right? So all these terms we have because the to be in a government, the whole idea of government is insurance, to be surety for another. So danger, you have to be insured for danger. So all these words have a legal meaning that are not necessarily opposite to the common speak, but have just completely different meanings. Sometimes they have nothing to do. Prestigious means trickery.
Well,
right?
and I've got the dictionary on the screen here. So just to give people an example, and we've used this one a few times, I was showing them danger. I'm going to show them nice. And nice means foolish, stupid, senseless. So, it's like this is, you're not being nice. We talked about this before. This is, something that, people need to understand that, people use words like nice without thinking what it really means, without ever even looking it up. And then it gets used daily, but it means totally the antithesis of what everybody assumes it means. Or worse.
Behind that is that the dictionary definition is the authority on the word.
Well, you have to define the word
in the art form.
Yes, so that's what I'm saying.
If I'm in a legal setting, I must know the legal language.
Yeah, I agree with that.
English, if I want to define my own terms, and I'm in someone else's art form or someone else's copyrighted, patented letters patent, then I'm going to be made a fool. I'm defeated before I even show up to court, because I don't even know that I'm showing up to court in a fiction. I don't even know I'm showing up in person. I just understand that I was summoned and I'm supposed to be there. Right? I don't even know how I'm defeated. First of all, secondly, that the language itself is the main tool of my defeat. Mm-hmm. Right, so that's the first thing that happened. That's why I wrote my entire book. The second thing that you have to realize is how they stole the land from us. Now, the short version is that they flooded the land with the law of the sea. Right, and as early as the 1700s, the courts were talking about how it's scary how they're starting to put admiralty law, the law of the sea, onto the land. And so basically, I call it the Great Flood. The law of the sea was put onto the law of the land. Anytime you go into a court, you see an American flag with the gold fringe around it. That was an executive order that declared that wherever that flag is, it's the admiralty law or the international law of the sea, is there. So we're not operating under common law. There's no common law in the United States. That has been removed. So any of us who are citizens of the United States, we have no common law. Guess what? A Bible is the foundation of common law. It's non-existent in the United States. There is no moral law in the United States. So in other words, there's only the legal version of the law. There is nothing opposing it. Right? So that is what we have to understand, that they've removed. I'm not saying common law is a good thing, because common law, when you get up into the bad parts of it, it's all the court decisions and everything like that. But at the foundation of the common law, and I've read this dictionary definition before, is the Bible, not religion. And it specifically says not any religion surrounding the Bible, but the Bible story itself. The law itself is actually the foundation of our law as transferred from England. The common law was transferred to England. In the United States, that doesn't exist. We're strictly an admiralty maritime jurisdiction, or a special maritime jurisdiction is what they actually call it. So you got to understand that you're under a contractual situation at all times. You're not under any kind of common law. And the maxim of law when it comes to contract is that the contract makes the law. Okay, the contract, if you can be fooled, or your parents can be fooled into putting you into a birth certificate contractual situation, right, a contractual relationship, then you're no longer on the land. You're now in the sea. You need a vessel, a citizenship, right? All that clever colloquialism is actually very valid when you look into it. And you find that the way we were defeated is that we were all put into the sea. You have Jesus. Jesus was able to walk on the water. He did not need a vessel. all right? Then you have us. We sink, right? When you look up the term water, it doesn't mean real water, right? When you're underwater, it means you're in debt, right? That's what it means to be drowning in debt, right? So we're underwater unless we have a vessel to prop us up. And that's what the United States citizenship is. And under that is the land. The problem with water, whether it's virtual water or not, is that when land is underwater, it cannot be owned when it's in the common, that is. So if I have a patch of land and there's a lake in the middle of my land and someone else's, that is common land. It's like a monopoly board. It's public land. No one can actually own that's not private, in other words. So we're all walking around on the water, in the water, which means that all of the land that is in the federal lands, for instance, 83% of land in Nevada is federal land. 53% of land in Utah is federal land. 49, I believe, in California is federal land. And I don't mean that it's federal land in the capacity of the federal, I mean that is owned by the federal government. Most people think that states are, California is California, they have states' rights. No, that's not how it works. In all the enabling acts and the constitutions themselves, it actually says that the people of the state, when they form this constitution, give up all right and title to all public land, right? So, like I said, 83% of Nevada is federal. It's owned by the United States, and the state can't touch it, can't do anything against it, because the law of the land is admiralty law of the United States, international law. So, I mean, technically, Nevada is 17% of its actual size, right? So that's where we're at. We have this takeover, basically, of public over private, and that's how everything was stolen from us, because we ourselves were put into the public, into the admiralty jurisdiction of the United States, taken from the land of the state and put into the United States, which is a foreign corporation in Washington, D.C., right? This is how everything. Now, the problem is we're foreigners in the States. The land is in the States. The private land that you can actually have under title, perfect title. The state has a lodial title, or call it fee simple, and they'll grant a fee or a perfect title, a perfected title, but you can't go any higher than that. The problem is, public persons of the United States are not citizens of this. We're no longer in the States. We're in the United States. The United States is a jurisdiction for foreigners. We're all foreigners in our states. This is how we were defeated. It's very difficult to put this into simple terms. The term you want to look for is escheat. ESCHEAT. That is how they did it. That single word, if you look that up either in my book or just look it up in any dictionary, you're going to find that our land was escheated from us. In other words, the right of inheritance was stolen from us. Our blood, the fact that the law recognizes two things. It recognizes the blood, which means that I'm inheriting something in a basically an immortal fashion, passing from blood to blood to blood. And then there's the legal, which means that I'm getting land through a contract, a matter of time. For instance, I might have land in a lifetime, the lifetime of the person. That can't be transferred through inheritance. And this is why they call us, the correct term for a citizen is actually denizen. A denizen comes from England, and it's one who's sort of in this limbo state that cannot inherit land, but you can acquire land through what's called a purchase, a mortgage, in other words, a deed pledge. So in other words, your person, your status can hold the land, but it cannot inherit. And you're not passing anything to your children because it's all been stolen. You're not passing anything to your children. Why do you know this? Because you, at your death, at your parents' death, they had to fill out a will. If they don't fill out a will, everything goes into probate. right? The law would recognize the inheritable blood of the child, and it would pass automatically without any problem whatsoever to the child. But we were put into the United States, into this maritime jurisdiction where our blood is no longer recognized. We're not in the common law, etc., where most of these concepts come from, and therefore all of our land, all of our inheritable rights, all of the so-called constitutional rights, completely gone. All the God-given rights that they talk about in the Declaration of Independence, gone. Because we're in a contract, we're in a piece of art, under terms of art, under a completely different jurisdiction, and therefore we have everything has been stolen from us. And this is what the whole story of the book that I wrote is that is what has happened to us. And the process again is called escheat. If you look that up, you'll understand exactly what happened. They used to call them where cheaters came from, because they were the cheaters were actually tax collectors.
So, Bill, you have any comments for that? And I am showing that on the screen here. To confiscate, to hand over as an escheat to or into some apparent example of the past, maybe belong to. But I showed the noun version a second ago. I'm just showing.
Well, so let me give you a good Webster's 1828 says in England, to revert the land as land back to the Lord. So we're talking about the feudal system.
Yep.
Manner by means of the extinction of the blood of the tenant. You see, what the birth certificate does is it causes what's called an attainder. You look up attainder, it's an extinction of the blood, or a tainting of the blood, so that it's no longer recognized under law. Once you understand that this is what has happened, then everything else starts falling into place. You understand that once the blood is tainted, once the law no longer recognizes the blood, and you step into this admiralty jurisdiction, the law of the sea, international law, then your whole entire inheritable rights, which go back, and let me just say one more thing. This is what the Second Amendment actually is, and I don't know why people can't get this through their heads, but this is one thing that I'm constantly challenged on. I'm like, man, if you just do a little research, the Second Amendment is not about guns. I wish that I could get this point across more than anything. The Second Amendment is about arms, coats of arms, your heraldry, your ability to show your bloodline to your family. The militia, the reason the militia is in the Second Amendment is because the militia bears the state flag. It's bearing the arms of the state. As United States citizens, where we call the United States as our father, we're acting per the son, or in person of the father, which is the United States. We're bearing like fools. We're bearing the United States arms, which are if you look up the arms of the United States, you'll see that it's defined as the flag and seal of the United States, the same seal that's on your birth certificate. Okay. Arms is not guns. The ability to have guns is a right that is inherent. It is not something that's legislatable. The reason they stuck this in there is because those private people of the states wanted to be able to continue with their inheritable bloodline, which is why in the preamble of the Constitution,
right, it's your family seal, your family coat of arms, and you have the right to defend that and the right to pass down your property and everything. And this extends to firearms and guns and all else by extension.
United States citizens don't have constitutional rights. Constitutional rights are negative rights protecting only those rights which private people of the states reserved from the United States. Whatever rights the United States claims over the states were given to the states by the quote-unquote people, which just means state. Okay? The Constitution does not apply to us. You have no constitutional rights. It's a big fallacious lie, and they'll tell you have them. Your lawyer will tell you. The judge will bring it up, but you do again a token bit of research, and you understand when Obama came out, when other people came out,
You should let Bill jump in here too.
No, go ahead. No, I'm listening.
When Obama did his speech and he said that the Constitution is a document, a negative set of rights. It tells you what government cannot do, not what it can do. That he was absolutely correct. And of course, Alex Jones got a hold of that and just, pretended to tear him a new asshole, which I know that he knows what's going on. It's so frustrating for me to try to explain this in little sound bites, which is why I had to write a 5,000-page book on the subject, right? Because the trickery involved in this, the birth certificate process itself, the fact that the Constitution says no bill of attainder. In other words, no extinction of blood in a bill from Congress can happen. But if you voluntarily contract with the United States, that's not a bill of attainder. That's you saying, okay, or your parents, I should say, putting you into this system and saying, all right, you're a ward of the court now. You're no longer my property, as it were in the legal, dictionary. You're no longer my property. You're property of the state. The state is your father, and I will raise you, and I'm giving up all paternal rights. In other words, so I'm tainting. I'm cutting the blood connection. Figuratively, metaphorically, it's all. Remember, we're talking about fiction, so it's not a real tincture of the blood. There are no black men, there are no white persons. These are all fictions. But in law, you have to remember it's all fiction. So a tincture or an extinction of the blood, as it's defined as cheat, means to cheat somebody out of their inheritance, their inheritable land, so that it reverts back to the Lord. In this case, it reverts back to a public land, the United States. So the United States has been sucking up land. The more people can get into the birth certificate process, the more land it can suck up, because then no one's inheriting land anymore. That's how we've been defeated.
I see.
Excuse me.
So, Bill, any ideas on how to tackle such a problem as that?
Well, I would say that there's a broader context that really what we're talking about is one case study of one society, in particulars and how we were talking about before, pill pull and language and lying and deceit can be used to have people work against their interests without even knowing it. Right. So it's a form of parasitism.
This is what I meant by this is first we have to realize we've been defeated.
Yes, but what I'm getting at is that to understand that you've been defeated, you have to understand how all that works. This is a particular case for the United States through legalese. It's happened in Rome. It's happened in other places. At the root of it is it's a way of subverting people's cognitive ability, their awareness of the situation that they're entering into. It's a way of lying. It's parasitism. So how do we deal with that? And also what affords all of these mechanisms to have an effect on reality is that they've got guns and they've got the jails and they've got the organizational capacity to come and take you away if you disagree or if you stand up against it. These are the things that we have to look at. We have to look at that. We have to look at the substructure that eventually spins out into these kind of case studies. So that goes back again that truthful speech, testimonialism. We have to have a high level of value and a willingness to prosecute false speech.
Well, let me ask you this, just to throw a curveball, because I often think about this. I really do. What are you willing to die for?
There's actually quite a few things that I would die for. There are things. This is Plato. There are things that I despise, but there are things that I despise more than death. Or I despise death, but there are things that I despise more. Would I put my life on the line for somebody who's being raped? Yes. Would I stand up for somebody else being abused? Yes, I would.
Okay.
These are things
Let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have children?
So what's that?
Do you have children?
Yes, I do.
I am CPS. I show up with a court order to take your children tomorrow. What do you do?
Are you asking if I'll fight?
I'm saying I'm CPS. I'm here to take your children. Here's a court order.
So I've got two choices. I can either go through the system or I can die fighting the system, right? At that door.
I'm
Don't
just
let them in.
curious
Don't let
because I
them
know
take the
the
kids.
reason I'm asking this is because this puts into the head that notion. Oh shit, the authority. The
Yes.
authority says,
But the authority is the authority because they've got the guns to come shoot you when you don't let them take their kid away.
The point is that what it does to your mind. It trips you up, right? Now, if the dog catcher comes and tries to take your dog, I mean, I know a lot of people that have physically got into fights to protect their cat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but when it comes to children, when it comes to the court order that a CPS agent, no matter how much you know or don't know about CPS, how evil it truly is, when they see that piece of paper, something tricks, something clicks in their head, and they become subservient, and they literally deliver their children.
But there's no magic going on here. It's because people understand what the consequences are. They understand the consequences of the law. So
I ask you again, what are you willing to die for?
Would I die for my
children?
children?
Right?
What's that?
It's not your children.
Why do you say it's not my children? Are you saying that I wouldn't fight?
I'm asking.
Yes, at my front door. I'm saying yes, I would, and I'm saying that that's exactly what we need to do. We need to start taking that stance. The very first thing that we need to do to change the situation is we need to regain a monopoly on violence.
Well, what I'm trying to do is connect the tool, the brainwashing, because there is, it's not the gun pointed at your head. Here's my
eliminate brainwashing as a possibility. That's what I'm saying.
I was listening to, and this is a corny story, but I was in the car contemplating this very subject, and a song came on, and it sang, no one can take away your right to fight and to never surrender. Corey Hart, 1980s, woohoo! And I thought about that, and that struck me in a way that I don't think anything's ever struck me before. And I realized if there's a gun pointed at my head, this is the most common thing that's used, law with a service at the barrel of a gun, that kind of thing. I hear it all the time, but I still sit there and I say, at that point, do I have to surrender? Am I going to take the gun? Do I have to surrender just because there's a gun pointed at my head? And even more so, the idea of a gun being pointed at my head later, is that going to make me so? Because for most people, I'd say 99% of the people out there, the thought of a gun being pointed at my head later on makes me cooperate today.
That's right.
That's volunteerism. That's the system we're in. It is a voluntary system.
Yeah, well, all slavery is because human intention, volition is not transferable. It's bound to biology. So, of course, a slave is a slave by choice. Caesar stood before the Gauls and said, be a slave or die. And they said no. Choose death. And they sacked Rome. So, yes, slavery is a choice. And that choice is you be a slave or you die. So, yes, it is a choice. It's not much of a choice, but it is a choice. If you want to take the choice back, you need to be willing to use force and use violence. Well, they've got more of it than we do. So maybe it's a stupid choice to die for a principle or to not surrender in that situation, which is probably what's running through a lot of people's mind. I'm one person.
I don't know if you two remember Kim and David Dortch and their son Zach and the whole thing that happened out in Marietta with the Riverside Sheriff and the Marietta PD, but they've been disappeared since November 2015 over that whole thing. So we don't know where they're at, if they're in hiding or what's going on. But, he had gone to jail several times standing up. He refused to sign anything, and he was, doing everything that he could. And eventually it came to, who knows? We don't know. We don't know what happened to him. but they're gone, and they were good friends of mine, but they've been gone for 2 years last week.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when we were talking about, and to be honest, those guys really didn't have a clue as to what to do. I know they were talking to Bert, and I broke off my communications with Bert because I figured out there was something very wrong there. But I do remember this. I remember that when we were talking about, so the idea of a monopoly on force, if you look at the state codes, the laws that are in place, it actually says in every state that you have just as much of a right as any police officer, any other officer of the law, to prevent a crime, to arrest, it is your duty as a quote unquote citizen to commit a citizen's arrest when you see a crime, to stop things from happening, to use violent force. So that's actually in the law. So when you say there's a monopoly, I get it. But there's a distinction
between the legal definition and the de facto. What I'm saying is, in fact, in reality, the government has that force. The legal distinctions become irrelevant when you look at what makes it possible in reality. What is happening in reality, right? That the legal definitions are just justifications for them to act on it and maybe provide some parameters that they agree to stick to.
So where do we address the issue? Is it the person that comes in, with the machine gun and points it at your head following orders? I mean, it's a systemic issue that we have to find a point to edge up, the corner of the rug somewhere and get underneath it.
Well, here's a document from I don't even know where it's from, but it starts off with the quote. It says, "There have been citizen arrests for as long as there have been public police, indeed much longer." Mm-hmm. That's the first quote, and that's from a court case, actually, People versus Taylor in 1990. So the idea of a police force, the word police, if you look it up again in the older dictionaries, just meant government itself. The police and
the polis, the city, the polis.
Police is just policy, right? It's the same word, basically. So when you're talking about police, you're really just talking about government itself. And they, of course, then create their own little, the largest street gang in America, which is the combined municipal police. But, we have to, again, how are we defeated? Because we think those police we believe, whether they do or not, that those police have some kind of authority to do what they do, right? We know they don't. But we accept that they do and will do it anyway. And
the only real authority for that would be the sheriff, like you and I have discussed.
But a municipal police officer only has authority over those who are subject to municipal law, which are United States citizens. That's why municipalities, states, counties, they're all municipal corporations. Cities, districts are set up, right? So this is a matter of not only a misunderstanding of the law and how it applies, but it's also a matter of, again, how were we defeated? We were put into a status that makes us subject to these things. This is why the Bible...
I'm going to tell you straight out where I have my issue. What this is boiling down to is a primary of linguistics. What you're saying is, because these words are here, this is what makes them real. And I'm saying that that's not what makes it real. What makes it real is that there are real physical actions, there are real physical agreements, there are real social...
To me, that's a childish argument.
It's not a childish. It's focusing on what makes it possible in reality.
I'm not disagreeing with you in any way. I'm saying you're stating the obvious, right? Let's go past the obvious.
Okay, so let's go past the obvious. Where the evolution of that monopoly and violence came up is that all policing occurred within the family. Even if there wasn't a circuit judge that said this is the ruling. It was up to the family to enforce that law.
Police,
so when they would go out and enforce that punishment, I'm talking long before police, and I'm talking long before America ever existed.
right.
Horde tribal.
The punishment, and quite often that punishment would be extremely extreme. Why? Because they're resentful and they're retaliating, which would then encourage more retaliation and so on. So law has never been about protecting people or doing good things. It's been about preventing retaliation spirals and family feuds and so on. And then that was what came out of that, is that if a third party not only makes a decision on what the punishment is going to be, but also executes on it, it prevents those retaliation spirals from occurring in the first place. So when you understand that, now we're talking about mechanisms that allow people to operate and function together under conflict without these other spin-off consequences. When we're talking about police and law today, we're talking about those functions in society, 2,000 years or 1,200 years down the line, that's all been wrapped up in language.
Well, when you're talking about police officers themselves, you're talking about some of the most ignorant people out there when it comes to law and what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Any form of law. What you're talking about with police officers are essentially revenue collection agents, right? With a really bad ego trip, right? I mean,
when we get rid of the legalese and we get rid of all of that, and people are living without this state or without this, how are you going to deal with conflicts between people? How are you going to deal with that guy that killed that person over there and their families want to kill each other now? There are social mechanisms at play here that need to be distinguished out from the parasitic abuses of them and how they actually operate. Because if we don't make that identification, we're either going to leave ourselves defenseless or leave ourselves right back into parasitism, which is continuously happening.
The ancient way of doing that is excommunication or banning from society. But the problem is society, the concept of society has been so twisted out of proportion, right? If I know everybody in my community, let me give you an example, the Scarlet Letter, right? The notion of the Scarlet Letter, where she commits a crime, she thus gets the Scarlet Letter, and everybody in the community won't allow her to have any power or do anything in the community because she's got the Scarlet Letter, because she's been banned from the privileges, if you will, of self-government, of being in this community and being self-governed. That's the old traditional way. If you don't follow the law that we have set up in our community, then you're going to be banned and extricated, right? That includes, murder and everything else. See, when I was looking up all these legal definitions and going through, I kept coming across these maxims of law and these sayings that said basically that prisons were not meant to hold for the purpose they're being used today. Prisons were not meant as punishments. They were meant as holding areas until trial. And then you were what was considered, see, it gets really difficult to talk about this, because even like in the Code of Hammurabi, in all the biblical codes, we get confused because it talks about putting people to death. Putting people to death in the Code of Hammurabi in the Bible doesn't mean physical death. It means cutting off the status in society, the trust, basically, the privilege of being in society. When you're banned, when you're caused to be quote unquote civilly dead or whatever, then you're
It's like that guy you were talking about begging to get back into the system, and the judge is like, "No, you're dead." It's the inverse. When you're banished, you're physically dead, and it's just like the Bible is constantly repeating: those who are not awake to this stuff are dead.
And so people point to Leviticus, and they point to all these Old Testament things where there's so much death and horribles. God is just this tyrant that's wanting people to die, and but the word "dead," when you look it up in the concordances, it's a fascinating concept that means not physical death, but to be banished, to lose your whatever rights it is that you're talking about. Spiritual life and spiritual death, civil life and civil death. You can't have both together. You're either spiritually alive and civilly dead, or you're civilly alive, i.e. a citizen, and you're spiritually dead. Right?
How so?
That's how so?
Yeah.
Because you can only have one God.
So is there a mysticism that's underlying this then?
If you're in the civil realm, then you are civilly alive, which means a fiction, right? You're a person, a status in society, and you therefore are spiritually dead because you're not able to. Remember, common law is dead in the United States. You cannot follow the Bible. You cannot follow any moral code of any religion or anything else in the United States. You have no you have no right to a moral stance, a moral argument.
Does that then mean that life,
Spiritual.
that definition is that then life is to follow a particular set of rules? So it's either God's rules or the state's rules.
They say, if you have spiritual life, then you're under God's law. If you have spiritual death, then you're under the law of man or law of state, mammon.
So this is why you go live in a monastery.
Where's the distinction between somebody that's walking around, living and breathing, and somebody who's 6 feet under?
It has nothing to do with that. When you're talking about in law, when you're talking about death. Yes, they will. Okay, so when you're born, you get a birth certificate. When you die, you get a death certificate, right? But what about this guy that died civilly in the court?
I know, but what I'm getting at is a conflation of terms, and so the
always, yeah, because it's the art, it's the language of the art.
I know, but what I'm getting at is a conflation of terms.
Yes.
And equivocation, right?
Yes.
So when you make an assertion like you're either spiritually alive and civically dead, or civically alive and spiritually dead, you're only talking within the legal context. Because I'm going to assert that nobody is ever outside of natural law. Nobody is ever outside of God's law. Not possible.
Well, no. In regards to the notion that ignorance of the law is no excuse, absolutely. You're never. The whole idea behind the Bible is that you're always responsible for all of your actions, no matter what you call yourself, no matter what flattering title, what person. If you're a soldier, you're a police officer, you're a president, you're responsible for your own actions. But in legal system, it's the opposite. The whole idea of the legal system is to be adversarial, i.e., satanic, to God's law. In the legal law, I give you license to kill. I give you license. License is a synonym for anarchy. License means permission to do something that is otherwise unlawful. Okay, so you're talking about being in the legal system. You're able to do things that you are not able to do in real life. Now, to God,
what do you mean by real life?
In the fiction,
what do you mean by real life? Because you're under nature, you're completely capable of going out and killing somebody.
Right, but see, this is why the story exists, that you go before God, right, and you say, all your sins are revealed, and et cetera, et cetera. This has to be part of the story, so you understand that when you go in front of a judge, i.e., God, the magistrate, which is, if you look up magistrate, it means God. You can say, well, my excuse was this: I was acting in person. But when you go before God, you have no excuse. This is the foundation of natural law, is to always remember that you are responsible for your own actions.
Your own actions, natural consequences.
Right. But in legalism, it's the opposite. The whole purpose of creating a legal system is to go against that law.
Yeah. So
they created duplicative terms and words and conflate that so that we're always confused. They say one thing, it means another.
But what I'm getting at is that we end up talking cross purposes. Like when I talk about equality before law, it's completely different than the legal system. Or when I'm talking about what people are pushing in the liberty movement under anarchy, it's completely different than what's going on in the legal system. So what I'm getting at is we can study this legal system as much as we want. It's not going to do anything for us. What we need to do is get our terms from nature. We need to define them by operations, by what's possible, by what the consequences are, so that we can reconstruct something that is within nature.
The problem with that is that you already are considered by law 100% of the time acting in a commercial capacity, i.e. acting in person. So if you don't know a language that you're supposed to speak
No,
to.
I've got that if I'm in a legal context, I need to have a legal understanding. What I'm talking about is all of this is going to fall. We started off with a consensus that civilization is crumbling.
That doesn't mean the legal system is going to fall. What I was going to say in the beginning also was that the notion of the 5 regimes is a cyclical, planned thing. A phoenix cannot rise from the ashes without burning, right? You know, that's the phoenix.
But I was not
let's let Bill go through here and explain his point.
I was talking about how if you have a period where mothers are under a lot of anxiety, so for instance, they're living in a war-torn country, that has an epigenetic effect on their children, which makes their children more aggressive. That's why we get a First World War and a Second World War.
But to challenge that,
you know what? Last time we were on, you talked for 2 hours, and I never got a word in edgewise. So when I'm talking about these cycles, I'm talking about that there are real effects around the environments that we live in, and the values that we hold, and in our combined actions create those conditions that we can look at and we can understand how it actually operates in reality, not within a legal system, but in reality. How does this affect us biology? How does this affect us in terms of our social agreements? What kind of time horizons can we expect if we're predating on other people?
Question?
Sending our criminals off here. How can we extend that? I'm talking about nature. So when I talk about natural law, I'm talking about natural phenomena and natural consequences.
Okay, so that's where I think there's a confusion. Because the term natural law is probably not the right term to use as opposed to the law of nature.
Well, I'm trying to subvert that and get people to use the law of nature as natural law and start aligning our laws.
But the law of nature is not, how do I say this?
It's amoral.
It's not the law of the jungle. In other words, there's the laws of nature, which refers to the way nature operates, if you will, the way it's designed and the way that it will continue to flow, the ever-changing, never-changing God. In other words, all of nature is God. Then there's the law of nature, which is the way that men are supposed to interact with each other. The natural law is a term that can easily be altered. So to say the law of nature means the law belonging to nature, whereas the natural law, that can, that's something that Mark Passio can talk about, and in Satanism, and make it sound just very legitimate. So there's look up law of nature in the dictionary, and
we've only got about 5 minutes left here.
Define for me concisely what natural law is.
I always go to if you go to law in Bouvier's 1856, the reason I use Bouvier's 1856 is because, again, I want to know what government considers first, so that I'm going to be in harmony with its views, of course. And if I go to law, I find law law positive. There's so many different forms of law. It's incredible. Law of nature. The law of nature is that which God.
Natural law, because you just said there's a distinction between laws of nature, law of nature, and natural law. So I want a definition to natural law.
You can alter the meaning of the natural law, but when you say law of nature, that is a concise term that means law belonging to nature, and that's how it's really defined as the law of God. And that's the important part that most people extract or leave out of, because the law of nature refers
so what you've just done is equivocated what I said about natural phenomena, as in science, and equivocated it back to legal terms. And you did this through the entire last episode.
You're not listening.
Nothing but equivocation. I did listen to you. I listened to you for 2 hours the last time.
You asked me for the definition.
I said of natural law, and then you avoid. And what I'm saying is that you can't give me a concise definition of that.
I'm trying right now. This is the most concise I can get. It's right out of a source. The law of nature is considered the law of The law of nature is that which God, the sovereign of the universe, has prescribed to all men, not by any formal promulgation, but by the internal dictate of reason alone. It is discovered by just consideration of the agreeableness or disagreeableness of human actions in the nature of man, and it comprehends all the duties which we owe either to the Supreme Being, to ourselves, or to our neighbors, as reverence to God. See, reverence to God, self-defense, temperance, honor to our parents, benevolence to all, and a strict inheritance to our engagements, not contractual engagements, but true shake of the hand type of thing, gratitude and the like. Right? Then it goes on to explain each one of these, sagacity or reason. So what's missing when you talk about the natural law, the way Passio and others speak of it, is that it's the opposite version. It sounds the same. It sounds good.
The natural law predates Christianity. The natural law goes back to the Stoics.
Is the point. Your sovereign has to be God. That's the point.
So that's what you're saying, is that the term natural law then is predicated on having a sovereign, and that laws that are based in nature are laws of nature.
Laws with an S are the laws of nature. Law of nature is what I'm talking about now. The laws of nature. But when you say natural law, then you can basically, that is something that, how do I explain this? It's so difficult to just, again, these short conversations. Natural, the point of the law of nature, law belonging to nature, i.e. law belonging to God, or law of God, law of nature, same thing. Natural law is not. When you call someone a natural, it's actually an insult in the legal system.
When you call them unnatural? Or natural?
A natural. When Shakespeare said this man is nothing but a natural, or when anybody, when you look at the word natural, it means illegitimate. It means it has a separate meaning than anything we've ever been taught.
So when Jan says to me that the Bible is all about natural law,
right, and that's what I'm trying to say. His intent when he says that is correct. But the term, as we found out in the first show in the comments, can be, they're talking about Satanism. Because someone else has learned it as Satanism. Someone else has learned it as this, someone else has learned. But you cannot mistake, if you use the correct term and say law of nature. So all I'm trying to say is the correct term, because law of nature, of always means belonging to, whereas natural law is something that can be
corrupted.
And that's what you're talking about in terms of
so we need to be more specific and call it the laws of nature.
There's a history to the term that begins with Aristotle about aligning human laws with nature, with natural consequence, which was then picked up again by the Stoics. And it entered into Christianity during colonialism, where they found savages that they couldn't convert to Christianity, but they could abstract out behavior from the Bible, teach that to the savages just fine. So they can still have their heathen ways, but as long as they follow these abstracted behaviors out of the Bible, then the colonies, these missionaries could accomplish their tasks.
Well, I'm telling you right now that if you were to go through the Bible, which I can tell that you really haven't, because when the Bible says over and over, do not respect persons, do not respect flattering titles, do not do this, do not take oaths, do not have false gods, do not. All of that that's not just reference to, that's a reference to the legal system.
I get it. It's a reference to the legal system. I get that. I understand that. And that is probably the original Babylonian or maybe Judaic legal system and saying step outside of that. And I completely agree with you on that. And I also think it's absolutely fascinating. But I also find that it leaves us nothing actionable. Unless we understand the consequences of these things in reality, in nature, we will not be able to reverse them.
It's actually the reverse. It is the instruction guide on how to act. It is the epitome of action, as opposed to putting yourself in a title, which is a noun, which is an empty space, a legal space.
But when I ask you to give me a definition of it, you can't. And when John asks me for a definition of it, I say it's no impositions on the agency of another. because all of those human conflicts.
Definition of what? Natural law or the laws of nature?
What I am calling natural law. And yes, I am hijacking the term.
Well,
what we should probably do is is this like?
I'll tell you why I do that. When human behavior, human rules align with natural consequences, all of the things that it boils down to is those impositions on agency and toto.
There's no need for human laws if the natural law is being followed.
True that.
Well, that's under the premise that everybody's going to agree in every situation. You're telling me human conflict will not rise.
When did I say that? Now you're putting words in my mouth.
There is a way to within natural law. Then there's the laws of nature. There's a way to handle.
This is what I don't understand is how is it that we can ever get anywhere with this beautiful knowledge that's in the Bible if at every turn that's the response? Well, we always have to. You go one step forward, then you just have to take it back down. You're trying to have a spiritual conversation, then you have to learn it before you can possibly critique it.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to get at is that we started off with a conversation about a legacy going forward and what we're going to do going forward, and then we spend the entire time talking about.
Well, I'll just
we're getting to a point now where at least now we're addressing something so that we have a place to pick up from in the next show.
Here's
trying to find that legacy point.
What you guys can talk about, because I got to go and I apologize. What I'm trying to tell you is that what the Bible tells you to do is keep it clean, keep it natural. Don't accept any fictions, any lies, any titles, right? So really what it's telling you is don't do anything that we do in the legal system. Do not act as Clint Richardson with Social Security number this, take that mark, take that sign, take that. I'm telling you that without the legal system, you say it's useless to know it. Well, without the legal system, you cannot understand the Bible. Without the Bible, you cannot understand the legal system. That was the great, incredible, concept that came to me is, holy shit, this Bible is talking about the legal system, and everything it tells you not to do comes from the opposite of the Bible, which is the legal system. They're pointless without each other. It's just like, there's.
And that was what Jacob's point was, is that all of this started coming about right at the time of Scaliger and everything, and this is a nice end point for Jacob too.
I gotta go, but this is why they say the Bible is the foundation of common law. If you do not follow the Bible, you will be put into man's system of law. That's the point. You have the foundation. It's there for you. They copyrighted it. They put it in there, and they give it to you free in hotels. Right? You can't not get a copy.
It's really simple. I just call it your owner's manual. Everybody got a copy.
They are selling everything that is against the Bible is what is for sale in the legal system.
And outside, all of the MK Ultra stuff, all of everything is all warned about right there in 400 measly pages to read.
Yeah, and so the notion of violence, if Jesus would have been worried about a gun pointed to his head, then the whole story would never have happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he never would have.
What we have to do is get to the point where we know, where we have a strategy of what comes next after we get these points ironed out, which is going to take
the first step.
And Clint, you got to go, but.
Yes, learning the law and then learning the anti-law so that you can always follow the law. That's all I'm promoting. What you do after that, how you step, where you step, what path you follow.
All of these books are all about law. You got the Bible, it's a law book. You got the Quran, it's a law book. Even the Book of Mormon is a law book. They're all law books.
The Talmud is the civil law of the Jewish people, quote unquote.
There you go. Talmud is absolutely law, no doubt.
Absolutely. All right, guys.
So let's try to do this again in a few weeks and see if we can find that legacy point. And Bill, thank you so much. Clint?
Last word, ignorance of the law is never an excuse. So
Yes,
take
because
those
to understand means to stand under the law, to be under the authority of law. I understand this stuff. I'm not ignorant about it.
No, I know. I'm just this is for the benefit of the people that are listening. So, no matter which system you're in, ignorance of the law, ignorance of fact is an excuse. Ignorance of the law, no excuse. So, ignorance of either side of the law when you're under it or you want to be under it is never going to be an excuse. So, that's all. That's all I'm saying. Nothing else. So, anyway,
all right. Thanks, Clint. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Clint, have a good night. Enjoy your party. Bill, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks, everybody who supported the show. We'll see you next week. And good night. And till next time.